practicing yoga sporadically over the past 20 years. A woman I worked with in the St. Joseph law firm, Morton, Reed & Counts, invited me to a yoga class one summer. Of course, Morton, Reed & Counts has since added Briggs and a couple of other names too, I think. And of course, it was First Christian's own Stephen Briggs who graciously agreed to employ me temporarily, likely under the influence of my mom and his wife, Nancy. I was in grad school at the time and wanted to come home for the summer to do theater. Someone thought I was qualified to sit quietly at a desk in a room by myself, answering phones and politely smiling at the occasional client. If you haven't gotten to know the real Anne Catherine behind the black vestments, colorful stoles, and microphone, you know I don't do anything quietly, and my niceties have a time limit. And since Facebook hadn't been invented in 2001, I was pretty bored. A bored feminist reduced to answering phones and smiling politely did not exactly facilitate the healthiest relationship between me and the lawyers in the firm, with the exception, of course, of Old Man Counts, who was, as the name suggests, too old to really care about formalities or work anymore, but who adored me. And I did get along with the real secretaries who did the real work, the ones who weren't seasonal, those who counted their boss's minutes and drafted notices and could type 60 words a minute. They'd been there for years, and I like to believe I was a breath of fresh air for the ladies in that stuffy old boys club. Sorry, Stephen. I was charismatic and smart and interested in their personal lives, and that's how I ended up invited by one woman to do yoga in downtown St. Joseph. Since then, I've practiced yoga on and off, usually when I'm on vacation or visiting someone. In other words, at times outside of my usual schedule when I actually have spare time. However, over the past 14 months, it has become clear to me that I need to do more for myself than go to therapy and go to church. I need to practice yoga. The mom of a fellow preschooler invited me last semester to visit her studio for a special Saturday class. For those of you in the medical or psychological fields, she uses EMDR, myofascial release, meditation, and yoga to alleviate pain and build stamina and ultimately reset the brain. Each month at the studio has a focus, and we students hear from our teachers, our yogis, about the practice we will spend the month working on. Last month, it was satya, or truthfulness. This month, it's aparigraha, or non-hoarding. What in the world does this have to do with the underground church, Anne? Well, maybe everything? Today is the Sunday that the Christian Church celebrates All Saints' Day, the day we call out the names of those who have gone before us, the day we intentionally remember our great cloud of witnesses. Pastor Brian asked me to fill in this morning, and I assumed it would be on this topic. However, in the mail, I received a copy of the book Brian has been preaching from. He assigned me chapter 5 and asked me to hone in on the idea of grasping at God. No problem. I've spent my whole life doing that. As I read my assigned chapter from The Underground Church by Robin Meyers, it felt like a flashback to my seminary days. It references great thinkers like Kierkegaard and Schleiermacher and Barth and Tillich and Bonhoeffer. I was fascinated to read about the Pygmalion effect educational experiment from the 1960s. I was challenged by the author's call to unearthly patience. And I was shocked to learn that we are not called to grasp at God. Religion, Karl Barth declares, is grasping at God. Religion is humanity's ego talking instead of listening. Religion is seizing truth and strangling it until it becomes dogma. Religion is grasping God and calling them male and mean and holding him out for everyone to see there in your greedy little fist, the mighty thing you have mastered. I had never considered that. I'm well aware of the evils and perils of religion, but I hadn't thought about humanity and religion by using those verbs before. As I reflect on my teenage and young adult faith, it seems my experiences were mostly with a hidden God, the God hiding in the boat while I was drowning in the sea, screaming for a raft or a rope or a life jacket or anything resembling life that might graciously be given to me by the master of the boat. It felt like because God was a male for me back then, he intentionally hid until I could win my way into his grace. His mysteries were elusive and maybe a little bit punitive. I was in quicksand, and if I called out loudly enough, would God stop carrying that man from the footprints in the sand poem and come help me out? My mouth was dry, my face was red, and I was sinking, but I believed God would save me. Indeed, I identified all of this terror, this grasping at God, as faith. In my subconscious, I guess, I believed God would only love those who worked for his love. I mean, once one has experienced the saving grace of God, it's not like you get to behave badly. So I prayed a lot and didn't drink or do drugs or have sex, and I was nice to everyone, and I believed my smile was salvific. I thought that God would rescue me from unacknowledged depression and unseen trauma if I believed the best theology and memorized the most verses and evangelized to strangers. All that on top of crying and calling and pleading, begging God. I mean, even the dogs eat crumbs from the master's table, you know. Anything to get noticed. Anything to feel seen by the infinite. But that's religion. I can't grasp God. So what then is faith? Like so many words, faith has been corrupted by the Christian right and fundamentalism. It no longer means what it used to mean 100 years ago, let alone 1900 years ago in the early church. It has evolved or devolved, perhaps, to mean all the things I described above: dogma, ego, mastery. You've never met people of faith who are so sure of themselves until you've met a fundamentalist ready to blow themselves up to demonstrate faith. You've never met people of faith so sure of themselves that they'll stone a woman for premarital sex, even if it's rape. You've never met people of faith so sure of themselves that they'll beat you over the brow with a Bible and tell you that women and gays and a lot of people in Africa and China are second-class citizens, half of whom are headed straight for hell. We've come to equate faith with fundamentalism, and rightfully so. These three remain: faith, hope, and love. But the greatest of these is love, because Lord knows faith is freakish, hope is hapless, and if we survive this world, it will only be because of love. Toxic masculinity and human genocide and corporate corruption are so powerful that the best we can do is love one another. There's no faith or hope to be found. But the author of The Underground Church says that what our culture considers faith today is not the real meaning of the word. Faith is not institutional doctrine. It is not absolute certainty. It is not dogma or beliefs or edicts or rules or religion. Rather, faith is an orientation, a dependence, a leap, a listening. Faith is humility. It is trusting the mystery. Faith is patience. Trust, hope, and love, but the greatest of these is listening, hope, and love, but the greatest of these is patience, hope, and love, but the greatest of these is. The author of the book compares faith to planting trees under whose shady branches we will never sit. He quotes Kierkegaard, who describes faith as an undoing, a sweeping away of all other attachments except God. As I consider this, I realize that these metaphors for faith or trust are not unique to the Western world or to the Judeo-Christian faith. At a night class I teach at the Kansas City Art Institute, my students read the Bhagavad Gita early this semester. It too calls for detachment from the things of this world. It calls us away from binary thinking to a place of practicing faith, dependence, to experience an undoing, to embody trust rooted in humility. Of course, one of the primary practices to help one embrace mystery is yoga. I've got therapy, church, and yoga because my religion has no physical element to its spiritual journey. My religion expects my head and heart to do all the work, detached from any physical form. Eastern religions don't carry that peculiar baggage of the body, as it were, but rather understand their bodies to be vessels of faith and trust and listening and patience alongside our heads and our hearts. Last month in my yoga practice, we studied satya, often translated truthfulness. In this chapter on faith, Robin Meyers devotes most of it to exploring trust, and also trust that is broken by untruths. He spent several pages discussing the irreparable damage of a lie and what it does to trust. Satya speaks to this. My yogi described it as integrity, seeing and communicating things as they actually are, not as we wish them to be. Satya. On Wednesday, we were introduced to this month's practice, aparigraha. This word is translated as non-greed, non-hoarding, non-possessiveness, non-attachment. Having read Meyers' chapter, my jaw dropped at the synchronicity of moving from October to November, from satya to parigraha, from truthfulness to detachment. So I've spent the week considering what it means to move from faith and dogma to trusting and undoing, to consider listening instead of speaking, to sweep away attachment instead of greedily grabbing at more things, more dogma, more religion, more God mastered in our own image. If the former is the nature of the underground church, what would it look like if our community was marked by humility and patience? What if when people looked at us, they saw a community comfortable with mystery, steeped in dependence without attachment? What if instead of calling us a bunch of liberals, they called us a bunch of yogis? What if instead of calling us bleeding hearts, they called us encouragers, good listeners? What if they shook their heads because we planted trees knowing we would not sit under the branches, because we voted knowing legislation would not change this generation, because we systematically demoted ourselves in this lifetime so that someone in theirs can experience life of their own? What if faith means trust, and trust means truthfulness, and truthfulness means unearthly patience, and patience means detachment, and detachment means dependence, and all of this points us to a greater mystery beyond ourselves that we may receive, but not grasp. Wow. Now that is something to meditate on this All Saints Day, and maybe even a few days after. Namaste.